crazy weekend in that college football. Obviously, I mean, it started like, what was that, Friday night with that Miami game, but the big one, Alabama, Georgia. We can just go and talk about Alabama and Georgia right here. Alabama was very impressive, especially in that first half. Like the their offense was just more open than anything Georgia had all game. Like even Georgia in the second half, and they made that comeback. They took the lead. Everything was contested, but Alabama, everything that they were doing was not nearly as contested. They kind of fell asleep a little bit there in the second half, allowing Georgia to come back. I mean, they jumped out to a 28-0 lead, and then Georgia then goes on a 35-5 run to take the lead, 35-33. And then Alabama says, hold my beer, one shot down the sideline, touchdown. Crazy. They have a 17-year-old freshman who was making a name for himself in that game. That dude, who was looking pretty good. Between him and the kid at Ohio State, man, I think we got some really good up-and-coming wide receivers, and Texas has some good ones coming up as well. But I was just really impressed with Alabama. To me, when I watched that game, it seemed like Alabama just had control of it, even though the Georgia came back in the second half. It wasn't as much as Georgia dominated, as Alabama was just not getting out there and executing on some things. So Alabama looked very impressed. Obviously, they jumped over Texas, taking over the number one spot. It's a more impressive win, even though it was at home. Texas won in Michigan. Alabama won at home against Georgia. Yeah, potato. I mean, it doesn't matter. They look pretty good. Texas and Alabama will not play each other this year unless they meet in the SEC championship game. So, there you go. And by the way, and just so you know, the number 2 spot for the SEC, whoever becomes the number 2, or maybe even just the loser of the SEC championship game, depending on maybe who it is, that might be the most coveted spot in college football. Possibly. It's possible. Or maybe even the third, the one that's left just out of the conference championship game. Quite possible. Okay. And I can show you why when we get to doing redoing the brackets. Texas played Mississippi State. There you go. Man, that's all you need to know. They controlled every aspect of that game. It was kind of a slow start. The only reason why Mississippi State even stayed kind of in it up until halftime was because Texas running back kept fumbling the ball a couple times in that game. But other than that, Arch Manning also took a little bit of time to get his find his way a little bit. He's still starting, figuring out that flow. But he looked pretty good. Made some good throws. He didn't make mistakes that cost turnovers. Obviously, that's a win. That's exactly what you want. You don't want to be turning the ball over, especially when you have a solid defense. You just don't want to put the other team in spots where they can get easy points. They didn't. Texas looked pretty good. Rolling. Moving on. They have a bye week, and then they'll get Oklahoma. Ohio State. So Ohio State didn't really play anybody. They played Michigan State. I mean, easy dub, 38-7. When they actually play someone, then we'll actually talk about Ohio State. I think the more concerning thing, and I get it, it's like, oh man, we're not having to use any energy right now if you're Ohio State. But the other thing is by the time you kind of get into that match of somebody punching you in the face, and that being the first time you've having to have felt that, what's going to be your bounce back? And that's going to be maybe a time period where you don't want to find out how your team responds to getting punched in the face. Right now, they're coasting. They haven't played anybody. Looking pretty good. There you go. Tennessee still doing pretty good. Moved up because Georgia lost to Alabama. I was kind of surprised Georgia moved down that much. But there you go. Tennessee didn't even play. They were off this week. So there you go. Georgia. So talked a little bit about Alabama, Georgia, and I meant to kind of just talk about Georgia with Alabama. But obviously, I mean, I haven't been big on Carson Beck. Okay. Not to say that he didn't lead the comeback in the second half. He kept them composed. He kept them in the game. They took a lead after being down 28-0, all of which is impressive. But you're in a hole because you're throwing interceptions. You lose the game because you throw an interception. Georgia is probably where I thought they would be. Like, that's about how I think Georgia is. About 5, my opinion. Now, obviously, that kind of depends on how some of these other teams are, but Tennessee's looking really good. Georgia's got to stop making mistakes. They got to stop starting slow. It's like they wake up from that hangover from Friday night and they just can't get over it until about halftime, and then they kind of pour it on. But it's like they need to figure it out. That's all I'll say there. But stop turning the ball over. Anyways, Oregon, you played UCLA. Not really much kind of going on there. Yeah, there you go. Penn State played a somewhat interesting game with Illinois. Yeah, they won 21-7, and that game was close throughout the whole game. It wasn't until late when Penn State kind of got that 14-point lead and was able to kind of seal it, but they were kind of in that dogfight there pretty much for that entire game. Penn State, they'll probably be in contention for the playoff, and that's about it. I wouldn't imagine Penn State's making a deep playoff run. So, there you go. Miami, my gosh. Probably the best game of the weekend was Friday night with Miami. Miami and Virginia Tech. Nobody thought Virginia Tech was going to be in that game. But the end of that game, okay, I'll say this. Miami, you should have lost. I listened to the commentators while you're watching that game. They were kind of siding with, whatever the call on the field is should probably just be the ruling. I don't see how you overturn this. And I completely agreed with that. Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, there was nothing conclusive to say that he did or did not have control as he comes down, lays on the ground, and it is then stripped out while they're laying on the ground. To me, this seems like Big Daddy ACC called and said, hey, Miami can't lose. Whoever's in that replay booth, Miami can't lose. Not if you want to have a job tomorrow. So I don't know about that one, man. I don't know about Miami getting that win. They get the win, I guess, but they shouldn't have. That shouldn't. I mean, the call on the field should have been what should have resulted in that play, which would have been a Miami loss. But anyways, Miami got the win. Moving on, undefeated. Still probably, maybe the best team in the ACC. I think it's still probably going to come down between them and maybe Clemson. Maybe Clemson's figuring it out, and also Louisville. Missouri. So Missouri did not play, and they were off. Michigan, they played Minnesota. They did barely win, which is kind of interesting while they're even at number 10. But I guess you can't have USC over Michigan because, USC just lost to Michigan. Anyways, Michigan kind of getting more of the benefit of the Ole Miss loss. But, yeah, there you go. Anyways, they won against Minnesota. Very close game. There you go. They're going to have a lot of close games because they just don't have a passing game. USC played Wisconsin, and they turned it on after being down early. I think they were down 21-6. Yeah, that was at one point in time when I saw it. And they went on and just rolled after that. So USC finally looked like the team I think many people thought they were going to be. Too bad it didn't show up last week when they played Michigan. Ole Miss with the big goose egg on the weekend. Wow. So this game was Ole Miss was the home team against Kentucky, which Kentucky might be a pretty good team. I get they've lost to a couple of teams, but Kentucky, after they had this real stinker against South Carolina, has looked very impressive. Obviously, they almost knocked off Georgia, and they did just get Ole Miss. So, I mean, Kentucky might be really good. They just might just throwing a real stinker out there. Maybe they're just trying to figure things out. It's their beginning parts of the year against that South Carolina loss. But anyways, Ole Miss, only putting up, 10 points? Supposed to be a good offense, right? I question how good of a team, emphasis on team, Ole Miss really is, because a lot of people talk about individual skill talent, but that is not what wins a team game. That might win one play. That might win the crunch play. But when you got to play a whole game, the team wins or the team loses. LSU basically had a bye week. They played South Alabama. All right, moving on. Notre Dame, they had a good game with Louisville. The only thing here was this was on Peacock. I wasn't able to watch that game, and I was really kind of frustrated because I wanted to watch Louisville. But they had the Notre Dame Louisville game on Peacock, so I couldn't watch it. I'm not paying for Peacock just for a Notre Dame game. But Notre Dame started off a little bit slow, from my understanding. Just kind of as I was following on a Gamecast, and then it just kind of seemed like they just kind of controlled the game pretty much. After that, I really was hoping to watch that Notre Dame Louisville game. Clemson seems to have figured out their game after that 34-3 drubbing to Georgia, but they handled Stanford this weekend. So Clemson, moving on. Iowa State, man, that team. Iowa State's always a good team. They're always a good team. They have a really good coach. I'm really surprised he has not gotten an opportunity to go somewhere else. They don't get the best talent, and there's only so much the team can accomplish, because once you come up with a good team with better talent, you're not going to win. But, I mean, they handled Houston. Handled them. So 20-0. I mean, pitching a shutout. Yeah, Iowa State's always good. They are one of those teams that will not beat themselves. You're going to beat them. So if you don't come in and beat them, they'll probably win. But they are now the front leading runner here in the Big 12. Be curious to see how they handle some of these games, especially at the end of the year. They're going to get a pretty good back-to-back doubleheader there with Utah and Kansas State. Cam Rising will probably be playing in Utah unless he gets hurt somewhere between now and then. He'll probably be back. And then Kansas State, I like Kansas State. More on them in a little bit. As far as Iowa State, though, I like them. Man. BYU also looking like they're in pretty good contention there for the Big 12. Looking pretty solid. I don't really know much about that team. Be curious to see a game from them. Let me take a look here. Yeah, I mean, I know they just drubbed Kansas State last weekend. Be curious. How about try to see that Utah game coming up here in about a month, a little bit over a month. So we got Utah, which threw a freaking stinker to Arizona. This was late Saturday night. You might not have seen this. They could, Arizona, their defensive coordinator's name is Dwayne Akina, who is a former UT back in like the 2000s. He used to be a UT secondaries coach, and he's very good with the secondary. And if you watch that game, Arizona, their secondary was all over the Utah Utes wide receivers. They could not complete a pass because they were just getting knocked down. They were flying all over. Utah's offense looked very inept. Very inept. They couldn't do much. They weren't able to do much, obviously, by the 10-point score. So, Cam Rising did not play. Maybe that's a factor. So, we'll see once Cam Rising comes back. That dude just needs to stay healthy. My gosh, that dude has like a 99 on the injury bug. Oklahoma, they won. Yeah, I mean, they went to Auburn. And I say, meh, they won. But really, that was a very interesting game. That was an entertaining game at the end. Auburn had that game kind of locked up. They had the ball about 6 minutes, 6 minutes left to go. And Auburn throws the pick. Auburn throws a pick 6. And Oklahoma's defense then at that point in time just had to lock him out. And Oklahoma's defense is good enough. They're going to lock you out. So, I mean, it just goes to show Oklahoma's defense saving the team yet again. And that was a pretty good ending to that game because, man, that finish with that pick 6 is how they sealed it. Other than that, defense is really good. I think they still had O-line issues from I didn't see any of that game, but from a lot of the highlights I was seeing, I think I was peeking in on it on like a quad screen look. And, dude, their offensive line, Oklahoma's offensive line is just not good. They just don't look good. I believe the second quarterback, I forget his name, I think he played the whole game, QB2, who might be QB1 now. I don't know. Kansas State. All right. So Kansas State got the victory over Oklahoma State, bouncing back after getting drubbed last week to BYU. Yeah, there you go. I mean, bounce back. They looked very impressive. Kind of a week late to look impressive because BYU got your name. Anyways, yeah, Kansas State looked pretty good. Avery Johnson looked good. I'm high on that guy. He looks much better than their quarterback last year who now plays at Ohio State, Will Howard. I would rather have Avery Johnson. That's just my opinion. I believe Avery Johnson is that freshman. I think he's a freshman. Boise State is finally moving up in the world. Oh, yeah, that's right. They almost knocked off Oregon. I do remember that. Didn't see that game, but yeah. But they haven't played anybody. Georgia Southern, Portland State, Washington State. Like, Washington State's their most impressive win, and Washington State's not impressive. So, they'll be playing UNLV, which UNLV has possibly a quarterback issue. Maybe not. Obviously, their UNLV's quarterback stepped away last week and is not coming back due to NIL obligations not being met. But the guy, the quarterback that played this week did just fine. So you might not even need him. Louisville, yep, you played Notre Dame. I wish I could have watched that game. Bummer, could not. Indiana's undefeated. Who have you played? Absolutely nobody but UCLA and Maryland. Okay, well, I'm not going to... you're probably not going to get through these two. And Nebraska will probably also beat you. Nebraska's pretty good. Do not sleep on Nebraska. Nebraska's pretty good. So they'll be playing Nebraska in about 3 weeks. So Indiana, I'll probably try to watch that Nebraska game. Anyways, Illinois goes down to Penn State. They looked pretty good for playing a team in the top 10. They were competitive the entire game. Just kind of slipped up there at the end. And, yeah, lost by 14, 21-7. Texas A&M, I'm not high on, but they're ranked number 25. Like, who else are you going to put down there? Maybe they're figuring out their quarterback situation. Yeah, UNLV, obviously we know what's going on with their quarterback situation. Starter left last week. Arizona, obviously getting some votes. Nebraska, I'm also thinking is going to be pretty good. So Yeah, there's some other teams sitting right outside that top 25 that are probably going to be able to compete pretty much on any given weekend. So as far as how the bracket is now seating, let's just run through this real quick. So we do have some pretty good changes actually coming through this week. So we got Alabama. Alabama is now numero uno after an impressive win against Georgia. A lot of people were high on Georgia. I wasn't one of them. I'm not that big on Carson Beck. Not to say they don't have talent elsewhere, but Alabama looking pretty good. I was very impressed with Alabama, man. They were rock steady in that game. Number 2, Ohio State, no change there. Number 3, no change here, Miami. Number 4, big time change. Why? Well, Utah lost. So Iowa State, who is now at 16, is now at number 4. There you go. Iowa State now goes from 16 to number 4 in the college football playoff. What a jump that is. I love this college football playoff, man. It was great. Remember, Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame is higher than them, remember, Notre Dame does not qualify to meet any of the top 4 spots because they will not be a winner of a conference championship game. These are only for conference championship game winners. Okay. So I just want you to make sure you understand that. 5, Texas drops to 5. Here is where I will say it might be better to be that one team that's left out of the SEC championship game. If you got one loss and you're the one sitting out, or maybe if you're Georgia and you got 2 losses, maybe you're sitting out of that SEC championship game, you got a really high ranking, but you're just out of it. This might be where it's really, really beneficial to you because you won't have to play the SEC championship game. You'll get the weekend off. You'll play a 12 seed, then you'll play the 4 seed, and then probably play the number 1 seed, which you might have to do then the week later anyway, or the next game anyways at the championship game. But that might be a much easier path rather than playing in the SEC championship game, which you'd probably be playing, a number 1 seed, number 1 quality seed, I guess, number 1, number 2 team in the country. And then at that point in time, I mean, you'll get the bye, but it's like if you don't play in the SEC championship game, it's kind of like you get a bye anyways. So it's going to be really interesting to see if a team maybe tries to kind of fit in there. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is if you make that SEC championship game, yeah, you are trying to win that game. Obviously, you're going to try and win any game, but you don't want to lose that game because then you got to turn around and then play in the first round. So you play in the SEC championship game and then you play in the first round, which probably at this point in time would not be Texas or Alabama. Okay. If the way this goes down and we have Texas, if Texas loses to Georgia, right? If Texas loses to Georgia, Texas is not going to be the 5 seed, most likely. Or they might be. It's going to be really interesting to see how they rank them. Texas might be the 5 seed, or Texas might actually be the 6th seed. And that's assuming Texas beats Oklahoma in 2 weeks. But those might be the 3 best teams in the nation. It's going to be really hard to judge that because Ohio State they don't really have any competition. Penn State, Michigan are not good teams. They're not full for well-rounded teams. Not like Alabama, Texas, and Georgia. And you could probably throw Tennessee in there. Tennessee probably is also going to be in that conversation for the SEC championship game. So, yeah, the team that's going to get really screwed here is the team that loses the SEC championship game. And whoever gets that 5 seed, that might be the loser of the SEC championship game, just kind of throwing them a bone. of saying, hey, you know what, you lost. We're going to let you have the easier game here. But you 6th seed, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, 6th seed might be really prime spot because that might be the team that sits out of the SEC championship game, not the loser, right? Let me just go forward here. So Tennessee. So if Tennessee sits out of that SEC championship game, right? If Texas beats Georgia, Tennessee's sitting here on the outside. Alabama beats Texas in the SEC championship game, and then Tennessee's just sitting here on the outside. They didn't have to play the SEC championship game. They get to play the 11 seed, and then they played Miami 3 seed, and then you don't even have to mess around with playing in this top bracket who might be Texas, Alabama meeting in that game, that playoff semifinal round again. You probably have to go through Miami, Ohio State. So, man, this 6th seed might be the spot to be really in a lot of these playoff brackets maybe going forward. Man, obviously that's in the case of a very heavy dominant SEC playoff bracket, but it probably won't be like that every year. Woof. It might be a really coveted spot. That's all I'm saying. Georgia is at 7. There you go. Oregon went from 9 to 8 because, well, who lost? Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost. So there you go. And Penn State moved up 1. Missouri also, they did actually drop. I believe Missouri dropped from their tight game. Anyways, we got Michigan. Can't believe I'm saying that one. Michigan making it into the 12-team playoff. That is, dang, no way. I would have thought that. I would have thought that after the way Texas handled them. But it's like, yeah, I mean, you play a bunch of other teams that aren't on your level. And they are finally doing what I kind of thought they should have been doing after the Texas game. Just hand the ball off. Hand the ball off, do a lot of running, sprinkle in some passing, get your quarterback used to throwing in game situations because, man, he was just so uncomfortable with that. Looking pretty good there. And then Boise State, yes, is that group of 5 down here are ranked 21. So that is how our current playoff bracket is set up. And that SEC is going to be a crazy, crazy race. I don't know which way you want to be. Yeah, I don't know if you want to be that team that sits out of the SEC championship game, or if you are saying, yeah, you know what, let's go get that number 1 slot. But I mean, most likely in that semifinal round, you probably would be playing the team that you had just played to like 2 games before. So, yeah, this is gonna be a crazy one in the SEC. It will be very, very fun to watch from a fan standpoint. And Ohio State just keeps on cruising, man.